When we see news about natural disasters, the headlines are always about the human cost, and for good reason. But behind the 2025 Pakistan floods, there's a quieter story, a catastrophe that might be even more permanent. So today, we're going to dig into that story, the ecological collapse that happened when the waters rose, a story of habitats just wiped out and wildlife lost forever.
I mean, those numbers are just staggering, and every single one represents a life completely turned upside down. 2.5 million people forced from their homes. But here's the thing. That massive human tragedy, it's kind of like a curtain, and it's hiding an environmental story that's just as devastating, a story about the very web of life that supports everyone in the region.
Okay, so to really get a handle on what happened to Pakistan's environment, you've got to understand the scale of this thing. The data is, well, it's almost hard to wrap your head around.
And wow, this number right here, it really says it all. Look, this wasn't just a bad rainy season. We're talking about monsoon rainfall that was 190% above average. That's nearly double the norm. It's a huge red flag that our climate is in crisis, unleashing power that the natural world just wasn't built to handle.
So you look at the left side, and that's the story we all saw on the news, right? The tragic deaths, the millions of people displaced, the billions in damage. But now, look over to the right. That phrase, severe compounding damage, that's what we're here to unpack. It's a crisis that just keeps building on itself, and it's happening in a country that's actually a global hotspot for biodiversity.
And this right here, this is the part that's a real gut punch. This comes straight from the environmental reports. That word, irreversible, that's the one that should really stop you in your tracks. We're not just talking about damage that'll take a few years to fix. We're talking about permanent scars, a fundamental change to the natural world that you can't undo.
So, how does an entire ecosystem just collapse? Well, it all starts with the first domino to fall, the destruction of homes. And I don't just mean for people, I mean for every single living thing.
You can almost think of a country's ecosystems, its wetlands, its forests, its mangroves, as its own natural flood defense system. They're meant to soak up water and slow it down. And Pakistan has this incredible variety of them. But in 2025, the sheer volume of water was it was overwhelming. Those natural defenses were completely swamped.
And this table, man, it really breaks down what was basically a forefront war on the environment. So you've got the heartland, where over 1.4 million hectares of wetlands just disappeared underwater. Then you go up to the mountains, and you have these things called GLOFs, glacial lake outburst floods, that literally buried entire valleys. Along the coast, the mangroves that protect the shorelines were flooded with salt water. And in the forests, insane cloudbursts caused landslides that just stripped the soil right off the mountains. Each one of those is a major disaster on its own.
And you would know a big reason why those landslides we just talked about were so bad? It's this number. Only 5% tree cover before the floods. With so few trees to hold the soil and soak up the rain, a heavy downpour instantly becomes a destructive, landscape-changing torrent. That one little number shows a huge vulnerability that was already there, just waiting for a disaster like this.
Okay, so the habitats are gone. What happens next? Well, now we have to talk about the residents, the wildlife, the unseen victims of this whole thing.
To really bring this home, I want you to meet a very special animal, the Indus River dolphin. This species is totally unique. It lives nowhere else on the entire planet. And the thing is, it was already endangered long before these floods ever happened.
Think about this for a second. The entire population on the whole planet was just around 1,800. That is an unbelievably fragile number. I mean, they were already living on a knife's edge, stuck in the very river system that was about to be completely torn apart. And then the floods hit. This is the devastating blow. We're looking at a potential population drop of 20 to 30%. When your starting number is only 1,800, that is just catastrophic. All the pollution from the runoff, their habitat being shattered into little pieces, their food disappearing, it was a perfect storm.
And sadly, it wasn't just the dolphins. It was like a chain reaction, a cascade of loss that went through the entire food web. Migratory birds showed up to find their usual rest stops were just gone. In the mountains, incredible animals like snow leopards lost their hunting grounds. Fish populations just crashed. Even the little guys, the pollinators that our food supply depends on, saw their habitats wiped out.
So what happens when the floodwaters finally go down? The immediate danger might seem over, but the disaster leaves behind this long, dark shadow. We're talking about scars that are not going to heal anytime soon. And that long-term damage, it really boils down to three major things. First, you've got soil degradation. The floods strip the good topsoil away, putting huge areas at risk of becoming desert. Then, you have invasive species taking over, choking out the native plants that are supposed to be there. And finally, you get these dangerous climate feedback loops, where the loss of forests actually makes climate change worse.
And this is where the human crisis and the environmental one get tangled up all over again. People who lost everything are, out of desperation, moving into protected areas, which puts even more pressure on the wildlife there. At the same time, the country is spending billions to recover, which means there's less money, not more, for conservation. It just creates this awful, vicious cycle.
All of this leads us to our final point, and it's a really important one. Because what happened in Pakistan isn't just a local story. It's tied into a huge global conversation about what's fair, about justice.
There's actually a term for this. It's called a crisis of justice. And the idea behind it is actually pretty simple, but it's incredibly powerful. The countries that have done the least to cause climate change are the ones who are suffering the most from it.
Honestly, this chart just lays it all out crystal clear. Take a look at that bar on the left. Pakistan is responsible for less than 1% of the world's emissions. Now, look at the bar on the right. It's one of the top 10 most vulnerable countries to climate change. That gap, that massive gap between responsibility and suffering, that's the injustice we're talking about. Now look, people are fighting back. There are efforts on the ground, better warning systems to save lives, huge tree planting projects to rebuild those natural defenses. But the hard truth is, they're fighting a really tough uphill battle against monsoons that are just getting stronger and stronger.
And that leaves us with a final, really difficult question. You know, we could put a price tag on the economic damage, and we can count the human lives lost. But how do you calculate the cost of a shattered ecosystem? When a species is gone forever, when a habitat is just broken, what's the true price of recovery? And is it even possible to recover from that at all?